Two areas in the brain that are best known for language development are Wernicke's area and Broca's area. Wernicke's area, which is located in the left temporal lobe of the brain, like so right back here, is responsible for understanding what somebody says as well as understanding written language. And if this area is damaged, we might see issues with pronouncing well, poor language comprehension, and non meaningful speech, as well as difficulty finding the right word. Broca's area in the left frontal lobe is responsible for speech production. When damage has occurred to Broca's area, a person may have difficulty in speaking, or they may use telegraphic speech, which is speech that's kind of like a telegram, with only the major words used. However, they seem to understand what others are saying just fine. Broca's area is close to the face area of the motor cortex, and Wernicke's is close to the auditory cortex and the temporal lobe. Broca's area and Wernicke's areas are connected to each other, which is an important component of why speech and understanding and actually producing speech are so closely related. The majority, like 95 to 99% of right-handers, have left hemisphere dominance for speech. And for about 60 to 70% of left-handers, the left hemisphere is dominant also. But about 2/3 or 70% of left-handers have bilateral control of speech, meaning that while the left hemisphere is dominant, the right hemisphere also has control. So that's interesting to know about our left-handers. Language development, not surprisingly, is related to cognitive development. And through language, children express a wide variety of their cognitive skills. At age 2, kids have around 200 words in their vocabulary. And by age 6, they typically have around 14,000. Wow, that's a lot of learning in just 4 years. And in order to do this, kids learn about 9 new words a day. How on earth do they do that? There's something called fast mapping, where they connect a new word with a concept after being exposed to it just one time. In one study, adults gave the name cube to a game. The object of the game, which was this oddly shaped plastic ring, was introduced only once. Even 2-year-old kids understood what cube meant, which is kind of astonishing. But one thing about fast mapping, children sometimes have to refine their guesses about what the word means. And that's because some words are easier to fast map than others. Preschoolers learn labels for objects the fastest because those refer to concrete things they already know about from exploring. And then words for actions like go, run, jump are also learned pretty quickly. Modifiers, which are words that describe features of objects and people, round, red, sad, are also added pretty quickly. But there's a breaking point. Let's say a 2-year-old already understands big and small. He probably won't be able to understand other words for big and small, like tall, short, high, low, until somewhere between the ages of 3 and 5. A good example of this is now and then. Kids understand this in a relative way fairly young, like even 2 years, they kind of get it. But they don't get the distinction between yesterday, today, and tomorrow until much later. Preschoolers learn the meanings of new words by relying on a rule, and it's usually a rule, the principle of contrast. They assume that each new word they hear is unique, so when they hear a new word or a label for something, they try to tell what it means by contrasting it to the ones they already know. This is why it's so hard for young preschoolers to accept 2 words for the same thing. So if they already have a word for something, they find it hard to accept another word for that same thing. What they usually do is assume that it's a subset of the first category, like Sam and dog. They learn that Sam is a dog, but not all dogs are Sam. They'll often call other dogs Sam at first, and then they learn that, oh, Sam is just this dog. And then they won't make that mistake. They'll just call other dogs a dog once they've figured out that distinction. Once kids start learning words, they just take off, and their creativity is amazing. They use words they know to fill in for words that they don't know. Like they might say plant man for a gardener, crayoner for somebody using crayons. The fact that they invent these words shows that they really do use rules to develop their language. Preschoolers also use metaphors in their language, like a fire engine in my tummy to describe a stomach ache, or my leg is sparkly when their leg goes to sleep. Their metaphors are based on concrete sensory things that they've seen or heard. As young kids obey the rules of language, they'll begin to do some of these following things. They might add an S to express plural, use prepositions like on and in, or under, over. They'll form different tenses of the verb to be, like is, are, were, and will. All English-speaking children learn these rules in a certain order, from the simplest to the hardest. Spanish-speaking children also learn their rules in a certain order, from the simplest to the hardest. But by about age 3.5, kids understand most of these rules, and they'll actually overextend the rules. So they might say, my car braked, I run faster than you, my feet are cold. And this is called over-regularization. As kids get older and have more of an opportunity to listen to others talk, they'll generally correct those mistakes. Between the ages of 3 and 6, kids learn much more complex grammatical forms, but they still make pretty predictable errors. They have a hard time letting go of the subject-verb-object structure. At first, they'll ask questions in that order. What you are doing, Daddy? They also get into trouble with the passive tense because of their reliance on rules and the subject-verb-object word order. If you ask preschoolers to act out, the car was pushed by the truck, they'll usually push the truck with the car instead of pushing the car with the truck. But by around age 5, they've figured this out, and they can use the truck to push the car. Young kids learn the correct vocabulary and grammar and talking with others, but they also have to learn to use language in the social context. In order for a conversation to go okay, people have to take turns, stay on the same topic, and, say what they want to say clearly. Even 2-year-olds can have a conversation effectively by taking turns and responding to something that a person talks about. So they're carrying on a conversation, and they just keep getting better from there. By age 4, kids already know the culturally accepted ways of adjusting speech to fit the age, sex, and social status of speakers and listeners. And there was a study of 4 to 7-year-olds. They were asked to act out different roles with hand puppets. Kids used more commands when they had to act out the roles of doctor, teacher, and father. They spoke more politely when they were acting as a patient, student, and mother. That's kind of powerful that even 4-year-olds understand that. One way that preschoolers' language breaks down is on the telephone sometimes. They're egocentric, and so they think that you can see whatever they can see. They might show somebody their boo-boos, a new kitten, and think that that person can actually see it. We help kids develop language through having more skilled talkers, talking with those who aren't quite as good. When a child makes a grammatical mistake, we can respond by using the right words. So, for example, her gotted new shoes might be corrected by an adult saying, yes, she got the new red shoes at the store yesterday. You notice that that's extending what the child said. We might want to do something like that instead of saying something like, you mean she got new red shoes? Children might resist being told what to say, but if we gently support their language, they'll soon correct their own mistakes and they'll feel competent as they're doing it. Adults seem to help kids learn language naturally. They might explain a concept in a simplified terms. They might use a different pitch, often a higher pitch, especially for people who aren't around kids often. They might also use short sentences, repeat what a child says, and just to help kids learn to speak better or to learn their language. What about kids who are talked to a lot, but they still don't talk? Sometimes it's just the child's personality. He or she just isn't a talker. Delays after age 3 might affect how well a child will read, write, and think. So here are some things to be aware of. If, between 2 to 3 years, and definitely by the time a child is 3, if a child can't understand differences in meaning, like up versus down, if they can't follow 2 requests, like please pick up the bottle and give it to me, they can't use 2 to 3 words together, or they can't name common objects, there might be an issue. If between 3 and 4 years of age, if a child doesn't answer simple who, what, where questions, they can't be understood by people outside of the family, and they don't use 4-word sentences, that child might need speech therapy as well. It's funny, but the majority of late talkers are boys. Nobody really knows exactly why that is. We do know that some of the brain development, it's a little bit slower in boys, and that might impact it, but we don't have the exact reason pinpointed. I'm going to just briefly say some of the highlights of language development now, using materials from 0 to 3's Growing Brain curriculum, as well as a couple of other sources. By around 3.5 years old, kids often follow 3-step instructions, like please pick up the toy, bring it to me, and put your coat on. Identify most common objects and their pictures. Understand terms for family relationships, like grandmother, cousin, uncle. Understand words for basic shapes and sizes. Understand descriptive words like hard, bumpy, or smooth. And of course, all this depends on their having been exposed to these words and these experiences, right? Because if kids don't get exposure to this language, then they will not be learning those things. If they've been exposed to this information, they can understand spatial descriptors like on top of, under, behind, so those prepositions. Understand how many and who questions. Use but, and because to combine sentences and produce more complex statements. Name their gender and age. Use pronouns correctly, and use possessive words like mine and yours. Ask is and do questions, and count to 3. By around age 4, kids usually have an understanding of opposites, an understanding of time concepts like before, after, yesterday, and today. They can identify primary shapes and colors. They can label their feelings. Again, somebody has had to help them understand their feelings so that they can do this. So everything in here depends on being exposed to language. They need adults to help negotiate conflict. They just aren't great at solving their own problems yet, but when adults are there to support them, they can do it much better. And then soon they'll do it on their own. They understand how and when questions. They often ask when, why, and how questions. They'll use past tense of verbs like adding ed to jump to make jumped. And they use irregular past tense verbs correctly, like fell and broke, instead of falled and braked. By around age 5, kids very often understand around 13,000 words. They love silly jokes and words like poop, fart, and other words that people might not be so comfortable with them saying. They understand some more and less. They can respond to what happens if questions. They can retell a story in the right order. They can describe how to do something like play a game. They can describe a past experience. They can rhyme words, ask questions about how another person feels, answer questions about a story or something that happened. And they can say longer, more complex, and grammatically correct sentences. They might enjoy arguing, debating, and reasoning. And they might use words like first, next, and then. It's kind of crazy to see how quickly that language development just progresses.